Fog at Fort Bragg during training is not the gentle drifting mist people picture in movies. It drops fast and heavy like a blanket thrown over the world, and it fills your lungs with cold weight. It swallows every sound until the forest feels miles deep and empty. During the 6th hour of our night navigation drill, that fog came down so thick I felt it pushing against my face. Our squad, called Reaper 4, had one simple task: move through the Longstreet training zone and set up a defense near range 68. Nothing special, nothing new. I am Staff Sergeant David Hensley with more than 11 years in the 82nd Airborne. I had moved through mountains in Afghanistan and deserts in Iraq, so this should have been easy. Yet the moment we stepped off the hardball road and crossed into the tree line, I felt something wrong stirring in the air. The fog reached our waists as we began. Specialist Marcus Alvarez led the formation. He was steady and sharp. Behind him walked Private Joshua Whitaker, who was young but eager and growing into his role. Lieutenant Ethan Caldwell stayed in the center, like always, giving orders as he moved. Private Darnell Brooks guarded our left side. I walked last to cover the rear. The ground snapped under our boots with pine needles and dry twigs breaking beneath every step. We moved slow and careful, keeping our spacing and checking our sectors. With every 100 meters, the fog climbed higher until it brushed our chests. At the first checkpoint, Alvarez signaled stop, then spoke through the radio. "Checkpoint Alpha clear." Caldwell confirmed and ordered us forward toward Bravo. We pushed ahead, but visibility fell fast. Through night vision, everything past 15 meters was one solid wall of green haze. Then Brooks whispered for me, "Hensley, look at this." I crouched beside him and saw deep tire marks pressed into the soft dirt. "Fresh ones." Alvarez asked if it was part of training. I told him no. No one else should have been in the area tonight. Caldwell tried to reach range control. Only static answered. He tried again and got nothing. Alvarez said the fog sometimes messed with signals. It was true, but this felt worse. Caldwell told us to keep going and stay alert. We adjusted spacing and pushed north through the forest. The trees grew taller and older and blocked out what little moonlight was left. Our night vision painted everything in pale green shapes. 15 minutes later, Whitaker spoke. I heard something. We froze at once. I held my breath and listened. Soft footsteps, left side, about 30 meters out. Moving at our pace, tactical, not random. Alvarez knelt and raised his rifle. We shifted into a quick defensive line. The steps continued slow and steady. Caldwell called out for identification. No answer. He called again, still nothing. Then the footsteps stopped. We waited 2 minutes without a sound. Caldwell signaled to move. The air felt colder now. Every tree looked closer than before. The fog tightened around us until I could barely see Alvarez 10 feet ahead. When we reached checkpoint, Bravo, Caldwell tried the radio again. Only static and faint broken noise that we could not understand. He ordered us toward range 68, 2 clicks north. No one fought the decision. We were wet from fog and sweat, and the night felt thick around us. Then it happened. Whitaker vanished. 1 second he was in front of me. The next he was gone, as if the fog swallowed him whole. I called his name on the radio. No answer. Alvarez hurried back. Caldwell demanded to know what happened. We had no idea. Caldwell ordered a full sound off. Alvarez here, Brooks here, Hensley here, no Whitaker. We reversed direction and followed our own trail. Alvarez called for Whitaker again. Only the fog answered. After 50 meters, we found his rifle lying neatly on the ground, stock down, barrel pointed toward the brush, safety still on, magazine secure. No sign of a fight. Soldiers do not drop their weapons, not ever. Caldwell shouted for Whitaker. Nothing answered. I scanned the ground through my goggles and spotted footprints heading west. Standard issue boots. Whitaker size 10. We followed the tracks into dense brush. The fog pressed heavy on our backs. Branches scraped our gear as we pushed through. After 100 meters, the tracks simply ended, not faded. Stopped, clear 1 step, then nothing. The trees above were too high for him to climb. Caldwell tried the radio again. A faint voice answered but broke apart into noise. Then silence. Brooks asked what we do next. Caldwell said we keep searching. We spread into a line and swept the area, calling Whitaker every 30 seconds. The fog swallowed every shout. Time dragged. My legs ached. My goggles dimmed and I changed the batteries. The forest around us began to change. The trees spaced wider, the ground became smoother, moss covered the earth, then we heard it. A faint cry, help, it was Whitaker. Caldwell yelled for him, the voice sounded closer with each call. We moved fast through the fog until we reached an open circle of land that was not on any map. A perfect ring of tall pines with fog sitting low like water. In the center stood a wooden watchtower leaning as if ready to fall. At the base sat Whitaker, eyes open, still as stone, alive but empty. We gathered around him and tried to make him speak. He moved only his lips at first, then whispered in a flat, lifeless voice, "Do not follow the tracks. They do not lead anywhere, they only bring you here." He looked up toward the tower and we followed his gaze. At the top, something stood watching us through the fog, human-shaped, silent, motionless. When Caldwell called out, the shape stepped back and vanished. The clearing grew colder, the fog thicker. Whitaker kept whispering the same warning, and all of us understood something had gone wrong in Fort Bragg in a way none of us were ready to face. The clearing felt wrong the moment we stepped fully inside it, as if the air itself carried a weight pressing against our skin. The fog no longer drifted like mist. It pooled thick around our boots like heavy water. Whitaker kept staring straight ahead with that hollow, empty look, while the old leaning tower rose behind him like some forgotten relic. Alvarez and Brooks tried to lift him, but his body hung loose without strength, like he had no will to stand. Caldwell ordered us to carry him out at once, so Brooks heaved him over his shoulder, and we formed up to move. I brought up the rear, keeping my rifle ready, though the fog cut visibility down to a few steps. Every direction looked the same, no trail, no broken branches, no footprints even though we had just walked through. The forest felt like it had erased our path the moment we entered. Alvarez checked his compass and guided us south, which should have taken us directly out of the training zone toward the hardball road. We pushed through brush and low branches while Brooks grunted under Whitaker's weight. Every 50 meters we stopped to let him shift the load. His breath came hard and sharp, but he insisted he was fine. Still, the forest around us looked wrong. The trees pressed too close. The slope of the ground felt angled in a way I did not recognize. I checked my own compass. It read south just like Alvarez, but every sense in my body told me we were not heading toward anything familiar. After almost 20 minutes, Caldwell called a halt. We should have found the trail long ago. Alvarez scanned the area and admitted we were off course. Caldwell studied his map under a red lens, but nothing around us matched the layout. Checkpoint Bravo should have been in sight. Nothing but fog lay ahead. The forest stood dense and unbroken. It made no sense. Then Whitaker spoke again while still slung on Brooks' shoulder. His voice came out flat and dull like an empty speaker. "You are walking in circles. The forest does not let you leave." Brooks froze at the words. Caldwell ordered him to keep moving, but the tension in his voice betrayed his fear. Whitaker continued whispering, "The tower is the center. The paths always curve back to it. No matter how far you walk, you end up there." His words settled into my stomach like ice. Still, we pressed forward for another stretch, and then the trees began to thin. I thought for a moment we had reached a road. Instead, we stepped through the brush and found ourselves right back in the same clearing, standing before the same leaning watchtower, with the same heavy fog swirling around it. Brooks fell to one knee, exhausted from carrying Whitaker. Alvarez cursed softly. I felt my pulse hammer as the truth settled in. We had walked south without turning, yet somehow stood exactly where we started. Caldwell paced. He said it was impossible, but Whitaker's whisper answered him. "It is not impossible. It is the way this place works. You came in. Now it keeps you." Caldwell shut him down, insisting none of this was real, insisting it was just fog and disorientation, but his hands shook as he spoke. I knelt beside Whitaker and saw that his eyes did not blink even once. His stare locked on the tower, as if something inside it called to him. The clearing pressed around us with a stillness that made my skin crawl. Alvarez studied the ground near the tree line, saying there was no sign of us entering from that direction at all. No crushed leaves, no broken twigs, no disturbed soil. It was as if the forest swallowed every trace of us. I checked my watch. It should have been close to 0300. Instead it read 0247, the same as almost an hour earlier. I tapped the screen thinking it malfunctioned, but it stayed frozen on that same time. I felt the weight of the night heavy and strange. Caldwell finally ordered us to hold position until daylight. He set a perimeter with 2-man shifts, 4 hours until dawn. We spread out with rifles ready. Fog pressed at the edge of our vision. Whitaker sat at the center near the tower, keeping that same lifeless stare. I rested against a tree with Brooks keeping watch beside me. I tried to close my eyes, but every sound in that forest seemed wrong. No birds, no insects, no animals, just silence and a faint low vibration deep in the ground, almost like a hum. It filled the air quietly but steadily, as if the earth itself breathed. After half an hour, I realized sleep would not come. The fog shifted in slow waves like it was alive. Brooks asked if I believed Whitaker about the forest not letting us go. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to say it was all tricks of the fog, but my instinct told me something else, something older, darker, and not meant for us. I said we would know in the morning. He nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on the trees. Eventually, Caldwell shook me awake for second watch. I had drifted off without realizing it, and my neck ached from the awkward angle. The fog had thickened even more. Alvarez sat near Whitaker, watching him with obvious fear. I asked if they had seen anything. Caldwell said the clearing was too quiet, that nothing in nature stayed this silent. I moved to my position, scanning the tree line with night vision, but the fog swallowed the beam. Then I heard it. Soft, slow footsteps coming from the tower itself. I turned slowly and saw someone climbing the ladder. One rung at a time, calm, deliberate, a human-shaped figure rising through the fog. Alvarez lifted his rifle. Caldwell stepped beside us, demanding identification. The figure reached the platform and stood still, watching us. No features visible, only a tall outline against the fog. Caldwell raised his weapon light. The beam flicked through the haze and struck the figure. For a moment we saw a soldier wearing woodland camouflage helmet vest, but the face looked wrong. Too pale, too still, eyes wide open and empty. Then the light flickered and the figure moved, not climbed, not jumped. One moment it stood at the top. The next it stood at the base of the tower 10 meters away. No sound, no motion between points. It simply appeared there. Brooks shouted. Alvarez stepped back, trembling. I felt my finger tighten on the trigger, but Caldwell ordered us to wait. The figure watched us without breathing, without blinking. Then it spoke with that same flat, empty voice. You should not have come here. Caldwell demanded identification again, but the figure tilted its head in a smooth, unnatural way. It said it used to be like us once. Said it walked the same trails, followed the same orders until it found the tower, and the tower found it. Whitaker rose from the ground as if pulled by the voice. He whispered, "You are the first one." The figure answered, "Yes." I felt something drop in my chest, as if the night itself grew heavier. They spoke like they shared one mind, like Whitaker already belonged to whatever that thing was. When Caldwell warned it to step back, the figure said the rules do not apply here. Then it smiled with a dead expression that drained the warmth from my bones. Alvarez fired. The shot hit center mass. The figure staggered but did not fall. It looked down at the hole, then looked back at us without any pain. Without any fear, Caldwell grabbed Alvarez and ordered us to run. We fled into the forest with branches scraping our gear and fog wrapping around our legs. Behind us, the clearing stayed silent. The figure did not chase. It did not need to, because Whitaker had been right. The forest had already chosen us, and no matter how fast we ran, every path led back to that same place waiting for us in the dark. Running through that fog felt like trying to escape inside a dream where the ground dragged at our boots, and every direction looked like the last. We pushed hard until our chests burned, but when Caldwell finally signaled us to stop and regroup, we found ourselves surrounded by the same thick trees and heavy silence pressing down on us like a weight. Brooks leaned against a trunk, panting from both fear and exhaustion, while Alvarez kept turning in circles trying to find any familiar landmark. My own breathing echoed loud inside my head, and when I checked my watch, the time had barely changed at all, as if the minutes refused to move forward. Caldwell said we would wait for daylight and ordered us to set a tight perimeter around the clearing we found ourselves in again. The same clearing with the same leaning tower, standing like a broken spine in the middle of the fog. He wanted structure, patrol, order, control, anything to keep our minds from spiraling the way the forest was already trying to make us spiral. I paired with Brooks for the first watch. He sat close but kept staring into the fog as if expecting something to step through it any moment. My night vision turned the world into soft green shapes, but none of them moved. It was the silence that scared me more than anything. No crickets, no owls, no wind, no branches stirring. It felt like the world outside the clearing had been paused, and only we remained inside a place that did not want to follow the same rules as the rest of the base. 5 hours until dawn, Caldwell said, but I already knew 5 hours here could stretch into something unrecognizable. Brooks whispered if I believed Whitaker and his claim that the forest did not let people leave. I wanted to say no, but the truth was sinking into my bones just like the cold. We had walked straight lines on trusted bearings and ended up looping right back into the same place without ever turning. Something was bending the world out here, maybe the fog, maybe the tower, maybe something older than either of them. I told Brooks we would find out at sunrise because that was all I had to offer. My throat tightened every time Whitaker moved even the smallest bit. He sat in the clearing with his back to the tower staring at nothing. His hands rested on his knees like he had been sitting there for hours, maybe days. He did not blink, not once. When Caldwell shook me awake for second watch, I realized I had drifted into a half-sleep full of images of shadows moving through the fog. Alvarez sat near Whitaker, watching him closely. I took my position facing the trees. Everything looked the same as when I closed my eyes, but worse because now the fog seemed thicker, almost like it had grown while we slept. Then the footsteps began again, soft, slow, deliberate, coming from the tower. My body froze. I did not want to turn, but I did. A shape was climbing the ladder, one rung at a time. The same figure we had seen before, or maybe something wearing the memory of what a soldier used to look like. Alvarez whispered he could see it too. Caldwell stepped to my side, ready to give orders but not ready to accept what he was seeing. The figure reached the top and stood perfectly still, watching us. It was too far to see its eyes, but I felt like they were staring right into me anyway. Caldwell shouted for identification. The figure did not answer. He raised his weapon light, and the beam cut the fog to reveal the same pale, expressionless face with empty eyes that did not blink. Then the light flickered for half a second. When it steadied, the figure was gone from the platform and standing on the ground at the base without making a sound, without climbing, without falling, without any movement at all. One moment it was there. The next it was closer. Brooks cursed behind me. Caldwell held his rifle ready but did not fire. The figure stood silent, as if waiting for us to understand something it already knew. When it spoke, its voice was the same flat tone Whitaker had used earlier. "You should not have come here." Caldwell shouted again for identification. The figure tilted its head, too smooth, too controlled. "I used to be like you," it said. "I walked the same paths. I obeyed the same orders. Then I found the tower, and the tower found me." Whitaker stood up stiff, like his joints were locked. He spoke with no emotion at all. "You are the first one." The figure answered yes. Behind them, something unseen rippled through the fog, as if responding to those words. The connection between them chilled me more than anything else. Caldwell demanded answers. The figure replied that this place no longer belonged to us. It belonged to what came before. It said we were already inside. Already theirs. Brooks shouted that it was crazy. Alvarez brought his rifle higher, but his hands shook. I kept thinking of the first time we stepped off the road and felt the fog touch our boots. Something had claimed us then. Long before we noticed, Caldwell tried to keep control, but his voice cracked when he ordered the figure to step back. It did not move. It just stood with that unnatural stillness. Then it smiled. That dead expression made my stomach twist. Alvarez fired again, hitting center mass. The impact pushed the figure back a step, but it did not fall. It looked down at the hole in its chest like the wound was nothing but a suggestion. Then it looked back at us with that same eerie calm. "Rules do not apply here," it said. Caldwell grabbed Alvarez by the vest and ordered everyone to fall back. We fled again through the trees, turning sharply and pushing through the thickest brush we could find. Branches tore at our gear, but we kept running without looking back. The fog followed us like a living thing. Even when I forced myself to glance behind us, the figure did not chase. It only watched. Watching was enough. The forest was not going to let us outrun anything, because deep down I knew it was not chasing at all. It was guiding, herding us back toward the clearing, back toward the tower, back toward whatever had already claimed Whitaker. After 10 minutes, we collapsed in a random patch of forest. My chest burned like fire. Brooks dropped Whitaker, who now seemed lighter only because he refused to move or react to anything around him. Alvarez fell to his knees in frustration, shouting that there was no way out. Caldwell grabbed him and told him to focus. We had to try. We had to keep moving, but the truth I saw in Caldwell's eyes was the same one I felt in my own bones. We were not lost in this forest. We were being kept. And with every minute that passed, the fog felt thicker, the world felt smaller, and the night felt more alive. We sat in that patch of forest breathing hard while the fog pressed in like a living thing, and for a long moment no one spoke because none of us wanted to admit what we had started to understand. The woods were not simply confusing or dark or thick with fog. They were shaped by something that twisted direction and bent distance into loops that always brought us back to the same place. Whitaker sat on the ground with his back against a tree, unmoving and silent. His skin looked paler now, with faint dark lines just beneath the surface, as if the fog itself had seeped into him. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded even emptier than before. "There is a way out, but it goes through the tower." The words seemed to steal the warmth from the air. Caldwell turned sharply toward him, demanding to know what he meant. Whitaker stared forward without blinking. "The tower sits at the center. The spiral always brings you back. The only path that does not curve is the one that goes inside." Brooks cursed under his breath, calling it madness, but Whitaker continued speaking slowly, as if repeating something he had heard before. "The only ones who ever leave walk through the door at the base." I saw it happen once. A group like ours. They went inside. When they came out, the fog was gone and they remembered themselves. But I never followed them because I was afraid. He lifted his hand, and even in the dim glow of our night vision, the change in his skin was unmistakable. Faintly translucent now, veins dark and thick like ink spreading under glass. Alvarez stepped back trembling. Brooks stared as if looking at something no human should ever witness. Caldwell asked how long before the fog changed him completely. Whitaker only said time did not work right here. Hours or days felt the same. The fog made you forget piece by piece until you no longer cared to leave, until you no longer remembered you ever wanted to. I tried to hold onto my identity, repeating my name, my rank, my years of service, forcing the details into my mind before they could slip away. Staff Sergeant David Hensley, 82nd Airborne, 11 years in uniform. But even as I recited them, I felt something tug at the edges of my memories, like soft fingers trying to loosen them. Whitaker told us the fog would take us too if we waited. Eventually, the weight of forgetting would feel easier than the burden of remembering. Caldwell shook his head, refusing to accept any of it, yet fear flickered across his face in a way I had never seen before. He said this was a training area, not a portal or a trap or a supernatural maze. He said we were disoriented, exhausted, maybe affected by something chemical in the fog, but not held against our will. But when Brooks demanded, he explained the soldier who did not fall when shot, or the path that bent us back to the clearing, or the clock that barely moved even after hours. Caldwell had nothing to say. The silence that followed was heavier than the fog. I could feel the forest listening, watching, waiting. Finally, I stood and checked my rifle because it was the only real thing I could still trust. I said if Whitaker was telling the truth, we did not have another option. We could not wander in circles until the fog erased our minds. We could not stay still and wait for dawn that might never come. If there was even the smallest chance, the tower held a way out. We had to take it. Alvarez agreed. His voice shook, but his words were steady. Brooks hesitated, then sided with us, saying he would rather face whatever lived inside than wait outside and lose himself piece by piece. Caldwell looked at the tower through the fog with a gaze sharp and haunted. Then he nodded, though I knew the decision carved something out of him. We formed up with Whitaker leading because he said he remembered the way, even though none of us believed the forest followed any path at all. The fog thickened as we walked until it felt like we were pushing through heavy cloth. Shadows shifted at the edge of our vision with every step. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. After several minutes, we stepped back into the clearing exactly where we expected to be, exactly where the forest had always intended us to return. The watchtower leaned in the center like a dying creature refusing to fall. The air felt colder here, thicker, as if something breathed beneath the ground. Caldwell positioned Alvarez and Brooks at opposite ends of the clearing to cover us. Whitaker stood near the tree line, staring at the tower like a man returning to a place he had tried to forget. Caldwell and I walked toward the base where a small wooden door waited. I had not noticed it before. Maybe it had not been visible, or maybe the fog hid it until we were ready to see it. The door was around 5 feet tall, built from heavy dark wood, with iron hinges worn by age. No handle, no lock, just a door. Caldwell looked at me once as if asking if we were really doing this. I nodded because hesitation was a luxury we no longer had. He pushed, and the door opened with a long groan, revealing darkness that swallowed the beam of our night vision. Not ordinary darkness, but something deeper, almost alive. Caldwell raised his weapon light, and the beam cut through it enough to show a narrow stone staircase descending into the ground. Each step was uneven and worn smooth by time. Watchtowers did not have basements, yet this one reached downward like an anchor driven into the earth. The air coming from below was cold enough to make my breath catch. It smelled of wet earth metal and something old enough to have no name. Alvarez called from across the clearing, asking if we were sure. Caldwell ordered him to hold position. If we did not return in 15 minutes, he was to retreat and try to reach command. Alvarez wanted to argue, but followed the order. Brooks looked like he wanted to run after us, but fear held him locked in place. Caldwell and I stepped inside. The cold wrapped around us instantly, and the heavy door closed behind us with a sound that felt final. The narrow staircase forced us to move slowly with rifles raised. Each step echoed against the stone walls like we were walking deeper into a throat. The air grew colder, tighter, harder to breathe. After 20 steps, the staircase leveled into a long corridor with a ceiling barely 6 feet high, forcing us to crouch. Wooden support beams lined the walls, and the floor was packed dirt like a tunnel, not a basement. We followed the corridor until it opened into a round chamber about 20 feet across. The ceiling arched overhead. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with objects. Hundreds, maybe thousands of personal items arranged with deliberate care. Dog tags, photographs, watches, its uniform patches. Some rusted, some clean, some old enough to belong to men who served before I was born. My breath caught as the truth hit. This was a collection, a record, or a grave, and in the center of the chamber sat a table with a thick leather-bound book resting on it. The moment Caldwell opened it and saw the names written on the pages stretching back decade after decade, I felt the fog inside the forest whisper again in the back of my mind. This place had seen soldiers long before us, and it had kept them. And now the spiral path had brought us into the heart of whatever waited in this tower. The chamber felt colder the longer we stood inside it, as if the air itself thickened around us and pressed against our skin. Caldwell flipped through the pages of the book on the table, while I scanned the shelves packed with relics from soldiers across generations, dog tags rusted with age, watches frozen at impossible hours, wallets with worn photographs, patches from units that no longer existed. It was clear none of this belonged under a watchtower in Fort Bragg. It belonged to people who had walked into this forest and never walked back out. I picked up one set of dog tags and read the name. Private First Class Michael Torres with a date stamped 1987. How long had this place been here collecting the dead or the forgotten, or maybe both? Caldwell closed the book slowly and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. The last entry was fresh, written in neat, precise letters. Joshua Whitaker, 82nd Airborne, November 2024. My stomach twisted. Whitaker had written his own name even though he told us he did not enter before, or maybe he had. Maybe he had been pulled back in the moment we left him alone in that clearing. Before either of us could speak, footsteps echoed from the corridor behind us. Slow and deliberate, not hurried, not cautious, just certain. I raised my rifle and Caldwell swung his light toward the entryway. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, moving in perfect unison. The first one was the same figure we had seen earlier outside the tower. The others looked almost identical, with pale skin, empty eyes, and uniforms from different eras. One wore older woodland pattern gear. Another had a faded Cold War era harness. They stood like silent guards, waiting for us to understand something they already knew. "You came through the door," the first figure said with that same lifeless tone. "That means you understand. That means you are ready." Caldwell demanded to know what ready meant. The figure stepped forward, but not aggressively. Calmly, as if inviting us to finish a path we had started long before entering the tower. "Ready to stay," it answered. "Ready to wait. Ready to welcome the next ones." I backed toward the edge of the chamber, refusing to let them flank us. My heart hammered, but my mind stayed sharp because training kept me steady even when the world had gone insane. "We are leaving," Caldwell said. "You cannot leave," the figure replied. "Not anymore. You saw the names. That means you are part of this place now." It gestured toward the book resting open on the table. One of the other figures stepped forward and lifted the book with slow, deliberate grace. It held it open to a blank line, and a pen rested waiting at the top of the page. "Write your name," it said, "then you will be free. Free to do what Caldwell asked. Free to forget," the figure answered. "Free to stop carrying the weight you brought with you." I felt my stomach tighten. Something in its voice reached into the part of every soldier that carried heavy memories. Missions gone wrong, friends buried, decisions that never left the back of the mind. But the price of forgetting was clear the moment I looked at their faces. They were empty, hollow. No memory, no identity, no life. Just an echo wearing a uniform. "No one is writing anything," I said. The figure tilted its head. "If you do not write your name, you will wander the spiral until you forget anyway. The fog will take everything from you piece by piece. Until you are like us." Caldwell raised his rifle. "Stay back." The figure did not move. It only spoke again. "You walked the spiral. The fog carried you here. The tower called you. Now you finish what started." I shook my head. "This is not calling. This is trapping." "You think so," it replied, "but you came here because something in you wanted to." Caldwell fired a round into its shoulder. The echo of the shot boomed through the stone chamber. The figure jerked from the force but remained standing. It looked at the wound curiously, then looked back up at us without pain or concern. "You cannot hurt what belongs to the tower." Caldwell shouted for us to fall back. We ran for the corridor, with the figures watching us, but not chasing, as if they already knew how this would end. Their voices followed us, blending into one echo as we sprinted through the darkness. "You will come back. You will always come back. The fog will bring you." We threw ourselves up the staircase 2 steps at a time, scraping our hands against the stone walls. The cold air grew warmer with each step until finally we burst through the door into the clearing. Alvarez and Brooks spun toward us with rifles raised. Caldwell shouted for everyone to move. We ran hard through the trees, not caring which direction we chose. Anything to get away from that tower and the voices and the cold, lifeless eyes staring into us from the darkness. The forest ripped at our uniforms, roots caught our boots, branches clawed at our helmets, but we pushed forward, refusing to look back. Then all at once, without any warning, the fog broke. It did not thin. It did not drift. It snapped away like a curtain falling. The world opened around us. Stars spread across the sky. Dawn pressed faint light across the horizon. A familiar trail marker stood ahead, marked with numbers we recognized instantly. We stumbled onto the hardball road near Checkpoint Alpha. Our transport trucks waited exactly where we had left them hours before. Soldiers moved about, setting up morning operations, as if nothing in the world had changed. A staff sergeant approached, asking if we were all right. I had no answer. My mind replayed the tower, the book, the voices, the soldier who refused to fall. Caldwell steadied his breathing enough to say we got turned around in the fog. The staff sergeant checked his watch and told us it was already 6:30. 9 hours had passed, though it felt like days. Then he asked the question that froze the blood in my veins. "Where is your 5th man?" "Your roster says 5. The air felt thin. Brooks managed to answer. "Whitaker." Caldwell closed his eyes. He stayed behind. He did not follow us out. I turned toward the tree line, where the forest now looked ordinary, peaceful even. But somewhere inside it, the Watchtower waited. and Whitaker sat at its base, becoming something we could not save. Alvarez insisted we go back for him, but Caldwell said we had to report first. Procedure demanded it. And even if we returned without thinking, we would never find that clearing again unless the forest wanted us to find it. We walked toward the command tent in silence. The morning sun felt wrong on my skin. Too warm for what still clung to me from the tower. Inside that forest, something claimed Whitaker, and whatever it was not finished, because the spiral path never ended, and it would wait for the next ones who wandered into the fog. The debriefing room felt too bright and too clean for the things we had just lived through. A humming fluorescent light flickered overhead while the air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Major Kellerman sat across from us behind a metal table with a small recording device placed between us. His face looked carved from stone, and his eyes carried the same cold distance of a man who had seen far more than he ever admitted. Caldwell sat rigid in his chair, answering every question with clipped discipline, but the tension in his shoulders showed the truth. He was barely holding himself together. Alvarez stared down at his hands, refusing to meet Kellerman's eyes. Brooks kept rubbing his palms together like he was trying to wipe off something that no longer existed. I stayed still, letting my expression settle into the controlled blankness only years of service can teach you. Kellerman repeated our story aloud, as if the words themselves offended him. So you are telling me that Private Whitaker disappeared into a clearing that is not documented on any Fort Bragg map, where your team encountered hostile personnel who could not be killed, and that you escaped through a tower containing artifacts from soldiers dating back decades? His tone was flat but sharp enough to cut. Caldwell answered, "Yes, sir, that is correct." The major did not blink. He only asked if any of us understood how impossible that sounded. None of us spoke because none of us cared anymore whether our story sounded possible. It had happened. The fog, the tower, the figures, the book, Whitaker's empty voice. They were as real as the ground under our boots. Kellerman leaned back in his chair, tired more than angry. "Gentlemen," he said slowly, "what you experienced was a hallucination brought on by extreme conditions. You were exposed to dense fog, freezing temperatures, and extended stress during a night navigation drill. Situations like that can create shared illusions even among entire squads." Alvarez lifted his eyes for the first time and said quietly, "All of us saw the same things. The same tower, the same soldier, the same clearing, all four of us." Kellerman folded his arms and replied, "Shared trauma response. It happens more than you think, especially in combat-trained units." Caldwell slammed his hand onto the metal table with the force of a hammer. The recording device jolted. "We did not hallucinate a missing soldier," he growled. "Whitaker is gone. He needs help." Major Kellerman did not flinch. "Private Whitaker will be listed as missing pending investigation. His family will be notified. A search team has already been deployed. They swept the entire Longstreet training zone this morning. They found no clearing, no tower, no underground chamber, and no trace of Private Whitaker." Those words punched the breath from my chest, even though I expected them. Of course, the forest hid itself when command came looking. It only revealed what it wanted to reveal. Brooks tried to explain that the clearing moved or hid or shifted, but Kellerman cut him off, saying he understood how trauma shaped perception. He told us the mind fills in blanks with powerful imagery when faced with fear and fatigue. He said the human brain often mixes memory with imagination. He said Whitaker likely wandered off and succumbed to the elements. Then he delivered the blow none of us wanted, but all of us expected. Effective immediately, you four are placed on medical leave pending psychiatric evaluation. You will not discuss this incident with anyone. That is a direct order." The words psychiatric evaluation echoed in my skull like a warning shot. That was how the military buried stories it did not want spreading. They would stamp our reports, seal the files, file Whitaker under training accident or hypothermia or desertion. End of story. Except we knew better. When the major ended the debrief and dismissed us, we walked out into sunlight that felt wrong on our skin. Too warm, too normal, too alive compared to the cold weight still clinging to us from the clearing. The base moved with its usual rhythm. Soldiers heading to the motor pool, runners doing morning PT, trucks rolling through supply lanes. It all looked painfully ordinary, but inside my head, the memory of the tower still echoed, Whitaker's pale face, the way the figure smiled after being shot, the spiral path that twisted back to the same clearing again and again. Brooks lit a cigarette, his hands trembling so badly it took him 3 tries to get the flame steady. "They are not going to do anything," he said. Caldwell stared toward the distant tree line. "No," he replied. "They are not." Alvarez asked what we were supposed to do next. Caldwell did not hesitate. "We go back." I looked at him, knowing exactly what he meant. He said we return tonight after dark. Just us. No chain of command. No permission. We find the clearing, we find Whitaker, and we bring him home. Brooks stepped forward, saying it was insane that we barely survived the first time. Caldwell turned to him with eyes that carried something beyond fear. "I am not leaving a man behind," he said. "Not like that." Something in those words cut straight into my chest. Leave no one behind was more than a rule. It was the only law that mattered. I said I was in. Alvarez nodded. Brooks stared at the ground, thinking hard, then flicked away his cigarette and said, "Fine, we go get him." The rest of the day passed like a blur. We gathered extra batteries, chemical lights, rope, med kits, emergency flares, and backup radios. We cleaned our rifles, even though deep down we knew bull. It's barely mattered against whatever lived in that forest. We tried to reconstruct our route from memory, but the map felt useless. The clearing existed where the forest wanted it to exist, not where coordinates said it should. At 2100 hours, we met at the edge of the training area. The sun had disappeared behind the tree line an hour earlier, and darkness stretched across the base like a quiet warning. The sky was clear, no fog at all, yet not until we stepped inside. We moved into the tree line without speaking. With every step deeper, the woods grew darker. Our night vision cast the world in green shadows. We passed Checkpoint Alpha, then the area where we first saw tire tracks, then the spot where Whitaker's rifle had been left untouched. And right on cue, the fog rolled in, thin wisps at first around our boots, then thicker, then heavy, then alive. Before long, it wrapped around us the same way it had the night Whitaker vanished. After 30 minutes, we found footprints again, the same footprints, light steps heading west. Whitaker's size, his spacing, his path. The trail ended at the same place where it had ended before. Alvarez pointed at the empty dirt and whispered, "This is exactly where they stopped last time." Caldwell nodded and said, "Then we keep going straight through." Not following footprints, not following trails, just forcing a path through whatever lies ahead. We pushed through the woods in a tight formation, moving past the point where the footprints disappeared. Fog clung to our gear like vines, branches cracked under our boots. The night swallowed sound, then without warning the forest opened around us, and we stepped into the clearing again, exactly the same. Exactly where the fog wanted us. The leaning watchtower waited in the center. Fog pooled around its base like a rising tide, and at the foot of the tower sat Whitaker, waiting for us, exactly the way he had been before. Only worse, his skin now nearly translucent, his veins dark like ink under paper, his eyes hollow. His voice when he spoke was flat and cold. "You should not have come back, but it was too late. We already had." And the forest knew it. Whitaker sat with his back against the tower beam, exactly as we had left him, yet something in him had changed even more. His skin looked almost translucent, like thin paper stretched over shadow, and the dark veins beneath had spread in branching lines across his arms and neck. When he lifted his head to look at us, his eyes did not even try to pretend they belonged to a living man. They were empty and still, like glass set into a face that had forgotten how to feel. He repeated the same cold warning. "You should not have come back." Caldwell knelt beside him, gripping his arm with a force born of desperation, saying, "We are getting you out of here whether you like it or not." Whitaker whispered that he could not leave anymore because he wrote his name. Then he raised his hand, revealing the precise letters carved into his palm. Joshua Whitaker. The wounds were dark but not bleeding, just etched like dead markings carved into stone. My stomach tightened. He must have gone back into the chamber after we left him and carved his name to hold onto himself, but instead of anchoring him, it had chained him to the place. Alvarez stumbled back, horrified. Brooks stared like he wanted to tear the forest apart with his bare hands. Before we could react, the fog shifted and silent figures emerged from its white wall, circling the clearing. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, their uniforms mismatched across eras, their faces pale, their eyes blank. They moved without urgency, forming a ring around us as if closing a door. The first one we ever saw stepped forward and spoke with that same emotionless tone. "You came back. That means you understand now. That means you are ready to stay." Caldwell raised his rifle, shouting for them to back off. The figure told us we could not fight them. It insisted they were not enemies but our future. Everyone who walks the spiral becomes like them. Not through force but through time, because eventually the fog erases who you were until nothing remains except the waiting. Brooks screamed at them that we were taking Whittaker home. The figure tilted its head and said he cannot leave. He chose to stay when he wrote his name. Now the tower holds him. Caldwell dragged Whittaker toward the tree line while Alvarez helped lift him under the other arm. Whittaker hung limp, but his voice whispered in a broken loop, "You should have left me. You should go. You should run." The figures let us move but followed at the same slow pace. Their steps made no sound. Their formations never broke. They moved with the stillness of trees yet closed the distance like a tide. We pushed into the forest, moving south, or what we believed was south, but the fog pressed thicker around us, blocking every direction. Whittaker muttered that the tower was the center, and the forest curved around it like a spiral with no true exit. Still, we forced through the brush, dragging him over roots and rocks. The shapes in the fog never rushed, they never grabbed, they never attacked. They simply followed as if guiding us towards something they already expected. After several minutes, the fog darkened and the trees thinned, and I felt a familiar dread building in my chest. Then the clearing opened before us again. The tower waited exactly where it always waited, because every path curved back to it. Caldwell shouted in frustration, slamming his hand into the dirt. "No," he said over and over. "No." We held a bearing. We moved straight. We should not be here, but we were. The figures stepped into the clearing behind us, taking their places like spectators, returning to assigned seats. The first one repeated the same message. "You cannot leave by running. You can only leave by accepting. Write your names, join us, then you will be free." I asked free to do what, and the figure replied, "Free to stop fighting the weight you carry, free to stop remembering what hurts, free to remain in the fog where no one expects anything from you anymore." The words struck deep because every soldier carried ghosts, but this was no mercy. This was surrender disguised as peace. I told it that staying was not freedom at all, it was forgetting. The figure said forgetting was a kind of freedom too. I felt something heavy move inside my thoughts, like a hand trying to sift through my memories. I pushed back, remembering my name, my rank, my unit, repeating them silently like a mantra. Staff Sergeant David Hensley, 82nd Airborne, 11 years service. I clung to those details as if they were rope keeping me from drifting into the fog. Then Whittaker spoke louder than before. "You should leave me. I am already gone. But you can still make it out. You just have to want to more than you want to stay." Caldwell demanded to know what that meant. Whittaker said the fog only takes you if you let it. If you fight hard enough, if you hold on to who you are, you can break through, but you must do it before you forget why you want to leave. His words split through the fog like a flare. I felt the truth in them even if I wished I did not. The fog pressed harder against us like water trying to drag us under. My thoughts blurred at the edges, softening like wet paper. I forced myself to focus, gripping my rifle so tight my knuckles ached. Caldwell made the call, "Move now. Everyone move south. Stay on bearing. Do not stop." We ran, leaving Whittaker behind, even though it felt like tearing a piece out of ourselves. The figures did not chase, they simply watched, letting the forest do their work. The fog resisted every step, making our boots feel like lead. Voices whispered from the trees, calling our names, offering comfort, telling us to rest, urging us to stay. Brooks stumbled, and Alvarez dragged him up, shouting at him not to listen. Caldwell kept shouting directions even though the fog devoured his voice. Time twisted. My watch showed different hours every time I glanced at it. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but something pushed us forward, something thin and bright, like a thread of memory pulling us out. And then, without warning, the fog broke apart around us. The night opened into a clear sky scattered with stars. The hardball road appeared under our feet as if placed there by some unseen hand. Checkpoint Alpha waited ahead exactly where it should be. We collapsed on the asphalt, gasping, heaving, choking down breaths that finally felt real. I stared at the stars, counting them just to prove the world still existed. Command arrived minutes later, lights flashed. Radios crackled. Major Kellerman stepped out with a grim expression. He looked at the three of us, then asked the question that split my chest open. "Where is Lieutenant Caldwell?" My breath froze. I looked around. Brooks was on the ground coughing. Alvarez leaned against the guardrail shaking, but Caldwell was gone. He had run beside us the entire time. He had shouted orders. He had kept us moving. But somewhere between the fog and the road, he vanished the same way Whittaker had vanished before. Search teams scoured the area. They found nothing. No tracks, no disturbance, no sign of a man simply erased. The official reports later listed both Whittaker and Caldwell as missing in action during a night exercise. No mention of fog, no tower, no clearing, no hollow-eyed soldiers watching from the trees. The three of us were reassigned to different units separated across posts. The story sealed, classified, forgotten in the way the military forgets things it fears. But I remember because someone has to. I remember because forgetting would mean the fog finally reached me, and I know they are both still out there in that clearing, standing at the base of the tower waiting for the next ones who wander in. There are nights even now when I think about going back, walking into the tree line one more time, following the spiral willingly, writing my name in the book so the weight inside me would finally go silent. But then I see Whittaker's eyes, Caldwell's voice, the figure smiling after the shot, and I know that forgetting is not freedom, it is surrender, so I carry the weight. I keep the memory alive, and I warn anyone who will listen. If you ever find yourself at Fort Bragg on a foggy night, do not follow tire tracks into the woods. Do not answer footsteps in the dark. And if you ever see a watchtower in a clearing that should not exist, turn around. Leave, run as far as you can, because some places are not meant for soldiers, and some names are not meant to be written, and that is the truth buried under the fog of Fort Bragg. Some stories fade with time, but some wait in the dark for the next soul who steps too far off the marked trail. Tower still stands out there somewhere between the real world and whatever lives behind it. Maybe one day someone will walk into that clearing and bring those lost men home, or maybe the forest will keep taking what it chooses. But at least now you know the warning others never got. If you want more tales just like this, tales the world tried to hide, hit that follow, join the crew and stay ready. Captain Rebel never walks away from the dark. He walks straight into it.